right, there's a letter that has been signed by over 100 economists from the United States and from the rest of the world that has been sent to the U.S. Capitol because they are urging lawmakers from both houses to pass some sort of legislative solution to, diminish the impact of Judge Grisey's ruling that has, as you all know, has impacted Argentina's economy so much. And joining us today is Mark Weisbrot. He is an economist and co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. How are you, Mark? Thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thanks to be here with you.
Okay, Mark, I'd like to talk to you because I know that you guys helped circulate the letter that I just mentioned. And my first question, of course, is, what are the chances that the U.S. Congress is going to do anything? Is Congress going to respond to this? And if it does, what kind of legislative action could they take that could mitigate this and in some way help Argentina?
Well, I don't think they're going to respond right away, but they could at some point. They could rewrite the Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act, for example, because that was supposed to protect sovereign creditors from, that's a law, U.S. law that was supposed to protect sovereign debtors from this kind of an outcome. There are other legislative measures that they could take. I mean, what the judge did could even be considered unconstitutional, so that would be for a court decision, but they could write legislation to make sure that the court is not allowed to take this money, for example, that the district court or lower courts wouldn't be allowed to take money that was destined for legitimate creditors and hold it hostage in order to pay the vulture funds.
Now, I'm interested in what you just mentioned, because you said that a court could even declare this unconstitutional. It's interesting considering that this case went all the way to the Supreme Court in the United States, and it is the Supreme Court that decided that what Judge Grisey had ruled was, well, they didn't say it was accurate, but they refused to take Argentina's case, which in some way means that they validate what the judge said. So do you think that there's a possibility that this could actually end up being ruled unconstitutional?
Well, I don't think so. It doesn't look like it now because the Supreme Court didn't do its job. I mean, here's a case that was clearly, it was bad law. It was a bad decision. It had it was unprecedented. There's no precedent for trying to take hostage the other creditors in order to force a decision. I mean, if they had just ruled that Argentina should pay the vulture funds, right, that would have been a different story. But to actually say that you can't pay legitimate creditors, the vast majority of them, that is really unusual. It's an extreme decision. It doesn't have any backing in the law. And it has enormous ramifications both for the international financial system, for the U.S. Financial system, obviously for Argentina as well. And
how could this impact the U.S. economy, for example?
Well, the U.S. financial system handles over $200 billion of debt for emerging markets, and they're going to look elsewhere because this is not a reliable judicial system under which to issue debt after this ruling.
Right.
So,
some people were even saying that they were considering what happened with Judge Grisey some instance of legal insecurity. Do you agree with that?
Yes, it is legal insecurity. I mean, this was, it's hard to see this as something other than a political decision because it's so extreme and because it violates, fundamental legal principles of equity. It's very hard to see this as anything other than political. And it does raise questions about even the independence of our Supreme Court, which have been raised before, of course.
Well, and this is something that the local government in the last few months, especially as the deadline for a potential agreement between Argentina and the holdouts was nearing, this is something that the government kept saying. And they even questioned Judge Grisey's alleged unbiased decision. They kept saying, they even accused him of being on their side, and that he was a very biased judge, that his decision was not impartial. So it's interesting that you seem, and the letter also, even though it doesn't say it, it seems to agree to some extent on these accusations. Is that correct?
Well, I think people can speculate as to motives, but yeah, almost, it wasn't hard to get economists to sign this, and it's economists across the political spectrum too. And you had the IMF, of course, wanted to file an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, on behalf of Argentina, and they were strangely blocked from doing so by the U.S. Treasury Department. And that's another event which really hasn't been explained, but there's some interesting politics there to be sure, because I don't think that the Obama administration as a whole or the White House really wanted the Supreme Court not to review the case.
Right.
And yet Treasury took that action to stop the IMF from helping. And, I wrote a little bit about that to try and figure out what happened there.
Right. However, the Obama administration filed an amicus brief, and they were allegedly in favor of Argentina.
They didn't file one. That was the big thing. You see, they weren't asked by the Supreme Court to file one, and they did not file, although some people argue they could have filed even without being invited. Mm-hmm. They did not file at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court could very easily have taken the fact that that the U.S. Treasury blocked the IMF from filing on behalf of Argentina. They could have taken that as the opinion of the U.S. government, and that could be one reason they didn't review it.
Now, there's something that a lot of people have been saying here, especially in the government, concerning Grisey. And this is something that the New York Times agreed with, and I'd like to know what your opinion is. And the New York Times said that he was way over. He said he didn't know what he was doing. It was not a matter of being biased or not. He just thought he was ruling, or he was ruling accurately, and in fact, he was creating a huge financial mess on an international scale. Is this a possibility as well?
Yes, well, Floyd Norris had an interesting piece, I think, a week or so ago in the New York Times. I think that's what you're referring to, where he looked at what some of the judge's statements at a recent hearing and showed that he really wasn't aware of the whole, he didn't know much about the debt portfolio and who Argentina owed money to and what currencies and the kind of things that he needed to know in order to even implement his decision. And this was coming up, quite a long time after he had, years after he made his decision. So he still didn't know these basic things. So yeah, that does look bad, and that's why I say it really is an abdication of responsibility on the part of the Supreme Court. You could also say the Court of Appeals that took the case above him, right. Because that's what they're supposed to do when a case is decided incompetently, and it has consequences. They should be reviewing it.
Now, Argentina has been very confrontational about this, especially in the last few months, and they've been accusing him personally of being responsible of this that's happening. So, what do you think? What's your opinion on the way that Argentina handled the case? Do you think that being so confrontational helped in any way? Do you think they should have maybe adopted a different stance? They should have been more, instead of refusing to meet face-to-face, maybe if they had decided to meet face-to-face before, we wouldn't have reached the deadline, and maybe a disaster could have been averted. Do you think that Argentina's behavior in any way could have affected the outcome?
Well, it's tough to say. I mean, they did offer the vultures an offer that would have given them a 300% return in 6 years, which is pretty good. And they didn't take that. There wasn't a lot of indication that they were going to take anything that Argentina could afford in the sense of paying them. See, the problem is that just to pay them, they would open themselves up to lawsuits from other creditors that accepted the restructuring. Right. So that was the problem, and there wasn't anything. I don't know. There was anything coming from the vulture saying that they, for example, could postpone this decision until after, and that's what I think the court could have done too, even if they really wanted to decide in favor of the vultures, they could have at the very least postponed it until after December.
Argentina asked Grisey to issue a stay at least until the end of the year so that the RUFO clause could expire, and Grisey gave the opportunity to make that decision to the holdouts, and they of course said no. So that's how we ended up not being able to find an agreement. Now, final question, Mark, and this is something that nobody knows right now, but is Argentina in a default or not? Because right now the economy minister is giving a press conference and he says that Argentina is not in a default. Argentina tried to pay, and it's not Argentina's responsibility that it couldn't pay. It was the judge who decided to freeze Argentina's first payment. That was, they tried to do it by the end of last month, and Judge Grisey froze it. So both the president and the economy minister have said that they're going to have to find a new term for when you try to pay and somebody else freezes or bans you from paying. Technically, that's not a default. What do you think?
I think that's true. I mean, it is really the court it's an unprecedented thing. You have a debtor that wants to pay and can afford to pay and has actually deposited the money for payment. And the normal working of the banking system would be for that money, it's over $500 million, to be distributed to the bondholders. And the court is preventing them from doing so. It's really the court that's forcing a default, and it's not Argentina's default.
Well, allegedly, negotiations are still ongoing now without the Argentine government's involvement, and I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. Hopefully, this ends well and soon. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. It's been a pleasure. We'll be back with more soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.